Hi, so for this one, I'm going to combine a couple topics because I really want to get to other stuff, and this was just kind of a warm-up. So I'm going to talk about a couple things trans-specific, and that is stages of realizing that you are, and how to decide whether you transition or not. And spoiler, that's not going to be me making the choice for you. That's going to be how you make the choice for yourself. Nobody can tell you whether you should or not a therapist, not anybody in your life. But first, how you realize. And it's different now. When people say that representation matters, a lot of times you get pushback from people tired of gender swapped movies and or having a gay character because they're just putting them in there. This is all stuff that it does matter because there's people out there that see themselves in movies and in TV shows and in books, and it's important for those people to have characters to look up to too. I remember in Star Wars when some of the new movies came out, and oh my god, the series, oh my god, there's black stormtroopers, oh my god, there's all these different kinds of people. I'm like, yeah, and you know what? A lot of the people that are represented there, they were fans of it. And I'm sure there's going to be one that isn't, and I'll get to hear all about that. Believe me, I know a ton about Star Wars, and I know the fandom can be a little hostile. But one of the ways that you realize is that you see somebody that makes you realize something about yourself. And the difference is, when I was a kid, there was no characters in movies, TV, books. I'm sure there was a couple, but there was nothing that I could look at and say, oh, that's exactly how I feel. That's like me. And that is such a huge part of kind of coming to understand yourself when you're different, is having that model of something you can then understand. I remember knowing there was something different in kindergarten. It was literally one of the first days in kindergarten, because up to this point I had played with cousins and had friends. I'm sure memories are thin back then, but I remember when I first went to school, I went to a very small school, and people are always like, oh, well, I went to a small school too. There was 30 people in my graduating class. And so when I went to school, there was, I think most of them at first were all in the same kindergarten. But there was probably 15, 20 people in my class, in that classroom. And I just remember looking around, and when we went to do activities, like if we went to recess or something, I remember everybody grouping up, and the girls went over here and the boys went over here, and I was like, I feel like I know what they want me to do, but I don't feel like that's what I want to do. But when you have up to that point, there are girls, there are boys, and you don't have any sort of example of something that is like, oh, this person is this, but identifies as this. So because you don't have that, then you are stuck in this position of, you have to be so confident and so sure of yourself to be like, no, I'm not going over there because that's not where I belong. You're going to get pushback. Believe me, I did. And at some point you learn to just do what they're saying, because it's not just the teachers, it's the kids. It's they're kids can be awful. And most people learn to, if you're not going to be able to really, be the person you think you should be, well, then you better pretend to be the person they want you to be. So that's why that's important. And it wasn't until I was in, high school, maybe even after that, where I started to see versions, but still not people identified with. It was, the Jerry Springer people. And, you'd see people that are like, oh, well, that is something. And then you'd like, well, but I'm not going to be that kind of person, because most of those people are crazy. But there's stages of realization, and it's probably easier now, I would suspect, because there are trans characters, not a ton, but there are some, and there are a lot more trans people visible, still not a ton, but there's more likely that you're going to run into somebody earlier. And that's one of the ways that people say that society is trying to turn kids into something they're not. It's really there's more kids that are identifying as trans because they can see and understand what that means now. And that comes with a lot of blowback, and I don't understand why people care, but they do, and they make up stuff, and it's frustrating. I just want people to be able to be the person that they want to identify as. And as long as somebody isn't messing with other people, I don't know why anybody cares. So that is the general stages. Like, I remember knowing when I was 5 or 10, what is that? Kindergarten? 5. And not really being able to identify it until much later. And even then, I don't see a lot of them. So it took a while before I met people and I realized, oh, there is something I can do about it. And then it takes a while before you're like, I need to do something about it, because now that I know, like, I can do something that I want to. As to whether you should or not, a lot of people will do pros and cons. And again, I'm not making this decision for you. Nobody should make this decision for you. You shouldn't ask anybody whether you should or not. But a lot of people say do pros and cons, but I don't find that particularly useful, because if, let's say, you have so many reasons that you want to transition, but you live in a country where they're going to murder you for it, that's a pretty big con. You might have to do something about that. Maybe you can move somewhere else. And then maybe you can then do something about it once you remove that con from the table. But I find it a little more helpful to list the pros and cons, and then list like 1 to 10 how much the weight that they bring. And so on the one side, your need to transition is a 1 to 10. Like, we are biological, messy beings. Not everybody needs to, even if they are, or identify or feel like they are. There are people that have thought, hey, I think things would have probably been different, maybe better, had I been born the opposite sex. There's people that think that. And then they go about their day. It doesn't bother them enough to do anything about it. It doesn't bother them enough to make choices. And if they don't need to, obviously, why would you? The more you need to, you start to get into, but do I want it enough to overcome all of these things? Because you may have family that you have to provide for. You may have friends that you're afraid you're going to lose. You may have family you're afraid to lose. You have all of these things. You may have a job that is not going to be okay with it, or a career that, is not going to be okay with it. There's all sorts of things that you have to decide what the consequences are going to be. And maybe they're none. Maybe you work in some sort of tech job and they barely see you anyway, couldn't care less. Like, it's just a name change. You could have family and friends that are just like on board. But there's going to be most likely some version in the middle of all of those things. Once you start getting on the scale of pros, the need being, 8, 9, 10, at some point, this stuff doesn't matter. And unfortunately, sometimes that comes with huge blowback. But this is so important that you need to do it, because if you don't, like, I was in a position where there was a very real possibility I was going to check out, because I could no longer continue knowing that there was things that I could do to make myself feel better. So, but that means that those consequences still exist. And I remember when early on, I came up to Seattle to go to a support group and to go do other things. But the first thing I did was go to a support group. And I remember it was a lot of people that were just griping about their jobs wouldn't cater to their needs, or the people that they lived with didn't understand, or like, and I understand the need to have the ability to talk about that, and to sometimes just venting is useful. But at some point, if it's not important enough to deal with it, then it's not important enough to do. And if it gets into that category of you have to do this, then you just have to deal with this. And that is the difference in the advice that I've given people. This is a difference often than other people will give. It's not just about you and what you need. It's about the consequences that are going to come with it. And if this is important enough, then you're just going to have to find a way to deal with that. And in some ways, looking at it that way does simplify things. It may not make things easier. Like, you may find that the consequences are you need a new job. I had to get a new job because when my first employer in Seattle found out I was trans, figured out a way to fire everybody and then only not rehire me. And I could have just spiraled and decided it wasn't for me, or maybe that would have got to me a lot more than it did. I just got another job. Could have sued. My direct boss offered to give me money to sue, to find a lawyer. And to me, I had something I needed to do, and that was more important. So I just went and got another job. And then that job, luckily, was one that allowed me to do what I needed to do. I got downgraded pay in that new job, and eventually I ended up making more, but it sucked. And it doesn't always feel good. There are times when it will, but if it's important enough, you're just going to have to deal with it. And that sounds like I'm being dismissive of the issues, but if something is inevitable, then you're going to have to deal with the consequences, because they were equally inevitable. And if they're not, there may be some version of you not transitioning. There may be other steps you can make to make yourself happier. And, whether that's doing some things transition-wise and not doing other things. It's hard to talk about specifics because, I'm talking in generalities for kind of everybody. But there are versions of not transitioning that can allow you to be may be better off than not doing anything. And whether that is, just presenting socially transitioning sometimes, or maybe just hormones, not going super far into it. I don't know. But really it comes down to need versus consequence. And I hope that helps. I know it's making things simple, but sometimes you need to simplify things in order to just pull the Band-Aid off and do what you need to do. Or step back from the plate because you're not going to swing. But either way, I hope that helps in some way. And I hope I'll see you in the next one. I don't know what the topics are going to be. I think I may have to start pivoting towards other stuff because there's so much going on that I would like to talk about that are not this specific thing. This was just kind of an easy start. So hope to see you in the next one.